So welcome, and great to see so many people jumped on board tonight. I really get excited. It's our first sort of video session for the year, or our first coaching. It's great that, like I say, to have so many people and have a bit of interest in what we're going to talk about. So the format tonight will be pretty relaxed as always. I think people have been involved with sessions I've taken before. It'll be pretty relaxed, maybe a bit rough and ready at times, but we'll do the best we can and see how we go. I'll show a few slides in the moment for we'll probably have about 10 or 20 minutes worth of slides, probably a bit longer. The opportunity for questions on the way through, and then at the end we'll leave plenty of time for question time at the end. So see how we go. Because what I'll do is I'll put the slides up in the moment, take everyone's faces off, and then including mine. But then if you need to stop, or if you do have a question, just say your name and what your question might be, and we'll see if we can answer it as we go. How does that sound? All good? Okay. I don't expect everyone to put a thumbs up for that. For those who don't know me, well, I think you know my name's John Fletcher. My little bit of background is I'm a performance coach. I currently work, my personal work is working in high performance culture, leadership and team alignment. So I do that on a daily basis, and I'm part-time contracted at Netball Tassie to be their high performance coach, look after their state programs and their ANC program as well. So we'll get started. I'll try and get this little screen up here and see how we go. All right, and I'll see if I can get rid of everybody off there. Okay, can everybody see that okay? Yep, if you don't, send me a little message and I'll see. I think we can. Okay, developing a high performance team. That's what it's all about tonight. So we'll just change a few slides as we go. Give me a moment.
Hey, Fletch, just super quick. I don't think everyone's on mute, and there's a little bit of background noise.
Yeah, I can hear that
if
too.
You're not,
so
can you please
just on mute would be really great. Thanks very much. Now, for some reason, my slides don't want to change. So excuse me for a moment. I'll just escape out of that, and they were earlier. We'll go back to plan B. I do apologise. We'll try this one over here. Okay, let's just see what happens if I do that. Here we go. We're in business. Okay, developing a high performance culture for your team. That's what we're all about tonight. All right, so it doesn't really matter what sort of team you have, whether it's a junior team or an elite team. Everyone can have a high performance culture, but it's really all dependent. It's all dependent on what high performance looks like for you and your team, and how expansive you want to make it. To be. But it's all relative, really. Whether it's a junior team to an elite team, it's high performance culture is very much attainable. So on the screen, you might see what we're going to discuss tonight. First up is what is a high performance culture? Why is it important? How do you recognise it? Whose culture is it? And some simple ways to build and drive it. Okay, so what is culture? As I mentioned, every team has a culture. The first thing to recognise that is every team has its own unique culture. So like I mentioned a moment ago, whether it's from under 7s through to under 17s, through to an open program, an elite state program, not one size fits all. But everywhere you might have 2 people working together, 5 people working together. Anytime you have people working together, there is some form of culture evolves from that connection. Whether it be good culture or whether we consider it to be a bad culture. So essentially what culture is, in my thoughts, is culture is what we do, who we are, how we work together, how we communicate, essentially how we support each other. So we'll get a little bit more deeper into that in a moment. So when we talk about high performance teams, there's several key components that I believe drive a high performance team, but the 3 that we'll look at initially will be the ones you see on the screen: agreed purpose, dynamics, and mechanics. And there'll be another one we'll bring up on the screen in a moment. Now, the first thing, it's absolutely vital for any team that we establish what our purpose for the team's existence is. So when we talk about purpose, it might be fun and participation. It might be it's all about winning. It might be player development, and any time we have like an underage team, 7 and unders, 9 and unders, 17 and unders, a development will be a major component. It might just be an inclusion program, whatever it might be, but really important to allow us to develop the culture that's going to best serve our team is to understand why does our team exist and what the purpose is. So I'll be asking yourself that question if you really, if we're not quite sure about that. So once you've established a purpose, then we have a look at what our dynamics are, which is our little green circle. The dynamics are essentially what our culture is. Dynamics are who we are and what we do. So it's the expectations and behaviours that we have. We expect in a team. It's how we work together, and as I mentioned earlier, to how we communicate. The dynamics is really who we are, what we do, and that's really the key factor behind what a culture looks like. Some people have still got some, haven't got their notes on too. Would we maybe just tidy it up a bit, please? Well, that's good. That's a bit of good coaching there, wasn't it? So, in the purple circle, we have a look at that. That's mechanics. That's essentially our game plans and our strategy. So, dynamics, as I mentioned, are your culture, and dynamics drive your mechanics and underpin your purpose. You can have the best purpose and the best strategies and game plans going around, but if your team's culture's poor, you don't work well together, you don't support each other, or then you won't achieve the full potential of and achieve the aspirations you may have for your team. Now, the other little key factor, what drives our dynamics, which then drives our mechanics, our purpose, is how strong our leadership is. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end as our role, because I assume most of us would be in some form of coaching or leadership role, that leadership is pivotal. The strength of the leadership is pivotal to having a high performance culture. Okay. So culture is the behaviours that we reward. Any thoughts on what that might mean? Because when I work in corporate, or I work with all the teams I work with, that really is the definition I have for what culture is. Culture is the behaviours that we reward. Does anybody have any thoughts on that comment, what that might mean? Anybody want to say? All right, well, I'll help you out a little bit with that. Okay, so when we talk about behaviours, the behaviours that we reward, so when we talk about rewarding, we think there's what I would call productive behaviours and non-productive behaviours in any team environment. And so if we reward the productive behaviours, that's our culture. If we ignore or walk past or don't pay any attention to the non-productive behaviours, and we don't challenge them or manage them, well, then we're rewarding non-productive behaviours, and that becomes your culture. So any behaviours that are what I would call below the line, and if we walk past them, that's your culture. So culture is the behaviours you reward. If we reward the productive behaviours, well, that's our culture, and it's important then that we actually then manage or challenge the behaviours that are below the line. So essentially, we'd be looking for what we'd be calling productive behaviours all the time. In the ideal world, when we have built our culture, then we would be really looking for the players and the staff to monitor their own standards of behaviour. As, you know, we often say, oh, that's not our role or our job within the team to do so. That's the coach's job or the CEO's job. But when we get to a high-performing team and we have the culture that we really aspire to, then the players and the staff will monitor their own standards of behaviour. And you see that quite often in elite sporting teams. But that's also very manageable from any age group. And again, like I say, all relative to what your expectations are. Okay, here's a little bit of a matrix for us, or a little bit of a model I use when I'm working through where the players that I'm coaching with or the players that I'm working with sit in far as a high performance team or a high performance culture goes. And so if you look on the side of the graph, we have performance on the left-hand side, and down the bottom, I'll probably try and just move this little slide out of your way. Hopefully you can see there's behaviours down the bottom as well. So we'll have a bit of a look. So when we look at the bottom square there on the left, which is with the question mark in it, that's what we would say low performance and low behaviours. So when we're talking about rating our team members or even how our team's operating, low performance low behaviour. So then you'd have to question as to why are we in that situation, or why is that person in the team? What can we do about that? If we stay on the bottom line and we go across to the right, that's where we have high behaviours, low performance, and that's what I would call the willing athlete, or the willing team member. We often call them what I would call them the saints. They're the ones who are really willing to do everything that's right, follow all the team rules, the team behaviours, the team expectations, but maybe not the best performer, maybe not the most skilled in the team. They're the ones I would encourage that we work with as much as we can to hopefully get them up in the top bracket, up into the high performance section as well. If we go back to our left and go up to the top left-hand side where it says able, they're the players who have, very competent, very capable players. So they have the high performance output. So they're the ones who play the game very well, but they have low behaviours. So when we have a look at that, I call them able, but I would also categorise them probably in the sinners category, that they bring all the ability and the talent to the team, but they're not necessarily willing to toe the line and follow the team culture. And to me, they're red flags. They're potentially really quite dangerous. Whilst we acknowledge the skills and ability they bring to the game, into the team, they're the players that often take the shortcuts, don't want to do the hard work, not necessarily follow team rules, but can also be very, very influential on the team, because the other team members recognise their ability, and often they'll follow their lead, and even if they may not be driving the behaviours that we require. So now it's easy to fall into a trap with these ones. The question I would ask, well, if they are able, why aren't they willing? So what can we do to make them more willing and be more team orientated? And if we can unlock that key, then hopefully we might be able to move them across to the high performance team or the high performance culture box. But we often get caught in the trap, and I see coaches regularly, and I've fallen for it myself over the time too. Do we say, oh, well, we need those players, they're really important to us because they're our best players. They bring the skills and they're match winners for us. I've learned over the time that, I would challenge that if they're not willing, they're able but not willing, well then I would challenge that they are not necessarily a really good player or a good fit for our team. Because if we're rewarding poor levels of behaviour, regardless of how skilled the player is, well then it can become quite viral within your team, and then one player behaving poorly becomes 2 players, becomes 3 players, becomes 4 players. So the question I would ask about the 3 blue boxes there would be, well, how do we get the willing to be more able? How do we get the able to be more willing, so that we have as many people as possible in the open square up the top, where it's the high performance team, where we have high level of performance, or high level of competence, and a high level of willingness to do what's involved or required to make a strong team. So if our behaviours are not ideal, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, how do we support the person while challenging the behaviours? So the ultimate aim, and we're not quite there yet with our Tasmanian teams, but our aim certainly is in long term, is for all our Tasmanian players to be sitting in the high performance, high behaviour category. So it might be a good little model for you to take back to your training or back to your club and have a look and see, well, where do our players sit? Are they in the willing? Are they able? Are they in the high performance box? So in summary, when we talk about putting a high performance team together, which is, or a great team, we look for competence plus character, so able plus willing, and that will drive what we hope will drive a sustainable culture, which will leave a legacy that for year after year after year, we'll find that our culture stays strong because we continually have a good balance of competence and character. Historically, we've employed, or we've selected usually on competence, and then we look at character secondly, but there's a way bigger push now in the world that we look at character first and then competence and train the skills later. So, but the ideal world would be that we have a good balance of both. Yeah, a gentleman who passed away yesterday, which was very sad, but he was long-time president of Geelong Football Club, and he Frank Costa, and he He ran a big fruit and vegetable industry and was a great president to help Geelong rebuild their character and become the powerful team they are now. And his motto that he had on his wall all the time was that it was just character. I just forgotten it. I'll just have a look it up. Character over skill. That's what he used to say all the time. Okay, I'll just pop out for a moment. I'll just drop out for a second and see. Any questions so far? Okay, if you do have some questions, please ask or certainly write them down for when we finish. We can have a chat about that. All right, so moving along, here's a bit of a question for you, true or false? And now, again, I might ask if you can speak, you can certainly, true or false? Let's have a bit of a look at this. High performance environment equals high performance culture. I'll just jump out and see if I can see everybody. How can I do that? I'll just stop sharing for a moment. High performance environment equals high performance culture. What do we think? True or false? Who says true? I've got a thumbs down from Helen. Thumbs down from Nick. Thumbs down from Katie. Danny, all right. Who thinks it does? We got some up. We got some thumbs up. Okay, we have. We got some. All right, so we think, all right. Anyway, Anne-Marie, I might ask you then, why do you think that might be the case? Oh, you're on mute, please.
High performance, in my view, encompasses all of the aspects of what a good athlete is, which includes attitude, the willingness to adhere to the culture. If you don't have that, you don't have a high performance culture. That's my view.
Okay, yep, certainly. All right. And I might give a bit of definition around environment in a moment, but I think you're quite right there. Yep. Anybody else have any thoughts? Thanks, Anne-Marie. No? Okay, I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions then. And I would encourage you to make sure you do have some questions, please, because anyone who's worked with me before, you will know that I'm a big believer that the questioning is an absolute key skill that all coaches really should develop and perfect. Okay, my thoughts on high performance environment versus high performance culture, and I'll just go back to the slide for us. So just bear with me, did I get this right? I think I have. Okay, and I'll just disappear out of here for a moment. Okay, so environment is, and Anne-Marie was quite right, we need to have the whole spectrum covered. But when we talk about high performance environment, that's often considered to be things like we need quality training courts, quality training equipment, best training courts, like I say, best uniforms, all the bells and whistles. And you often see places in business or in other sporting that have all the modern cons. And so people think, all right, we've got all the gear and all the equipment, well, that's naturally going to lead to us to be a high performing team. And it certainly does support and it does assist in it, but it certainly doesn't drive a high performance culture. Because as we know, culture is behaviors. It's not equipment. It's not money. It's none of those things. It's basically culture is all about our behaviors. So I often say to people, you know, is it the best in the world or the world's best? So what are we? Can we be the world's best without having the best in the world equipment or environment? And as I mentioned, environment does not automatically equate to high performance culture. We often hear excuses, don't we? Oh, we don't have the money, we don't have the facilities, we don't have that. But I'm sure we've all experienced teams that have performed really, really well on a shoestring budget or low numbers, whatever it might be. And a good example of that, I can go back to, we took an open team away in 1998 to nationals in Adelaide, and we did it really. It was a good challenge for us. We took 11 players away, where the other states had 12. We had pretty much borrowed uniforms. We had netballs that bounced up and down in the air as you threw them because they were a little bit out of shape, but that was okay because that's who we were. We used to train Wednesday nights in Campbelltown on a very shortened court so we could get all the players from around the state together. We'd train from about 7 to 9 midweek in Campbelltown, and but the team actually achieved a placing in the finals for the first time for a long time, where they made the top 4. Now, the reason I use that story is that was a really good example of a team that had a good culture, had a strong self-belief, and was willing to do all the right behaviours that was going to lead to a successful performance. So, having said that, not all winning teams have a high performance culture. So I've seen some teams certainly win with very poor cultures, and vice versa. We've seen some teams that haven't been successful but have been a great team because they do have a high performance culture. They just may not have been enough talent in their ranks. So something to think about that. We can certainly still achieve by developing a good culture over necessary environment. All right, so don't tell me my slides have got stuck again. Excuse me for a moment. We'll just come back. I'll get the slides going again. We'll try that one there. Oops, sorry. I'm just not having it. Here we go. Rightio. So, why is culture important? So we need to get the right set of active behaviours so we can coach and so we can coach and players can play. Now, the key word in that little line there is active behaviours. We often see teams, I've often seen teams start the year and they have a set of behaviours that they expect a team to abide by, not rules or regulations, but behaviours. But then they just get forgotten very quickly. So they get stuck in the drawer or down the bottom of someone's school bag. But really important that we have active set of behaviours so we can coach and players can play. As coaches, we want to be able to focus on what I would call the macro things, the big picture things, helping the players develop their skills, making good game plans, whatever it might be, not having to deal with all the little distractions or the byplays that we don't really need, or the lack of focus, or the time wasters, the energy vampires, whatever it might be. And nor do the players. The players don't wish to do that either. The players want to get out, practice to improve, and just an opportunity to go out and play without having to worry about all the distractions. One of the world's leading sort of leadership coaches, Peter Drucker, often says culture eats strategy for breakfast. So really important that we have an active set of behaviours, and we'll talk a bit in a moment about how to put those together. So how do you recognise a high performance culture? So there's lots and lots of good examples, and I imagine we'd see them on a daily basis around our own netball courts or around our own community. But I'll throw a few up here that we might have a bit of a chat about. The first one you probably recognise is the All Blacks. And the All Blacks are one of the most, well, probably the most successful professional sporting team in history. For over 100 years, they've had an 80% win record. They come from a small country, as we know, in New Zealand. So in that environment, they can't say that numbers are a factor because they don't have a lot of numbers, but they do have a sport that is their main sport with rugby union and netball. Some of the things that they do, which they become quite legendary for, and like I say, these are highly paid professional athletes. They clean their own change rooms up after every game, after every training. So they go to the game, they go to training, they clean it up. They sweep the sheds, as they call it. So they clean the showers out, sweep the floors, leave the place spotless. They like to say they like to leave their Guernsey or their jumper better for having worn it. So if you wore the number 7 Guernsey or the number 11, number 15, whatever it might be, that jumper or that number is better for you having worn it. So when you leave it, your legacy is that you leave the jumper in better shape, because by living the behaviours that are expected of the team. They don't ever put the uniform on the ground, so they make sure that the uniform is always well protected and well presented. So they never put it on the ground, so because they have too much respect for what being an All Black means. So there's just a few examples. They have about 14 or 15 really strong non-negotiable behaviours, but it's just a couple I thought I'd throw out. Brisbane Lions, AFLW team, I've just put them up there for a little bit of a different reason. Their culture is strong. They've played in whatever existing 6 years now. I think probably played in 3 grand finals, lost 2, won 1, or just won the recent one. In the early, they played in the first one as well. But after the initial season, or the first couple of seasons, they had a large player exodus when the competition expanded, and they were raided from all the expansion teams and lost a lot of players. But they rebuilt strongly to be in the last 2 grand finals and then winning a premiership last year. So, or just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, in fact. So the culture is strong that they were able to survive a player exodus and to be able to continue to build and get back to the top level as to what they aspired to. Diamonds have a very strong set of brand and behaviours, expectations, where they certainly have them written down, and their brand is Sisters in Arms, and they do have 4 or 5 what we call above the line behaviours that support their brand. And finally, the Melbourne Storm, they're a team that's very successful in a sport that I would suggest has some cultural issues, and will fairly well publicised cultural issues. However, that they consistently perform at a high level over 15 to 20 years. They in a non-rugby league state. They've had high player turnover for various reasons, players retiring, players moving to other clubs. But they have a good history of bringing in what would say unrecognised players and making them into superstars. And that's because they have a very strong mentoring system. So they keep themselves out of trouble. They do a good job with the mentoring, and they become a standout team in a sport with what you might suggest is a bit of a checkered history. So that's good examples. We might think a little bit of some potential poor examples that are currently in the newspaper. There was some in there today, and there's been some of the last few months from other sports, but we don't necessarily need to speak a lot about those. But often that some of the reasons has been selection, coach behaviour, bullying, and just really not adhering to any standards or having any, what I'd say, real brand or behaviours or a high performance culture. So when we talk about high performance behaviours, we'll just throw up a few really simple ones that I would think come to mind quite easy, but I'm certain at the end you may have quite a few examples of your own to think about, and you might even want to raise them with us. Examples of high performance behaviours: punctuality. Punctuality, I believe, is pivotal to having a high performance culture. Punctuality is respectful. It allows you to be prepared. It allows for any potential lateness to training. So any teams that we work with at Netball Tassie, if it's a 10 o'clock training time, they're expected to be there at 9:45. If it's at 12 o'clock, it's an 11:45. So punctuality is not negotiable. You'll find it all high performance cultures that will be one of the major expectations. Being organised is another high performance culture or high performance behaviour. Organised, it decreases distractions, allows you to be maintain focus. Again, it's respectful for the people around you. So being organised is also really one that I believe should be absolutely not negotiable. This one's really, I believe, one of the strongest behaviours, and I often say that great teams or great players are ones that are continuously looking to improve. So an attitude of continuous improvement is with people. When we go to training, do we go to train to practice, or do we go to training to improve? Do we ask questions to learn? Do we ask questions to improve? So attitude of continuous improvement, again, is because if we stand still, well, then people are going to go past us, as we know. Another what happens after a score? So what do the good teams do after a score? Yes, we see in a lot of sports, they might celebrate and they might get a bit excited, but there's also acknowledgement all the time of who assisted or who supported or who was part of the play that made the score. Important, whilst we might enjoy the moment, there's also usually some humbleness, but not always. But it's important that after score that we maintain our focus, get straight back into the game, and we're also really supportive of everybody who made that score possible. Behaviours after a mistake. Again, a good indicator of what a high performance culture may look like. Does the player drop their head? Do they blame other people for the error? Do they blame the umpires for the situation? Do they forget to go back and play defense straight away? Do they drop off the game plan? So behaviors after mistake. Do we get straight back on to what we do and straight back into the next phase of play, high performance culture or high performance behavior? Or do we allow it to dwell and fester and impact what we do next? Presentation, I mentioned the All Blacks earlier, but I believe a high performance culture, again, is how well do we present ourselves. So do we have pride in our uniform? Do we have pride in who we represent? Do we have pride in the uniform for the people who wore it before us? You know, are we respectful of the people's efforts to provide the uniform for us? So again, a high performance culture, the presentation, how we present, how we look, how we want to be viewed by others is, again, another good example of how you might identify a team that's got a high performance culture. Two-way feedback. I don't know any high performing team or a team with really strong culture that doesn't have two-way feedback. They've created what I would call an environment or a circle of safety, or an environment or a safe environment where coaches feel comfortable and supported enough to be able to provide feedback to their players, and players feel comfortable and supported enough to be able to provide feedback back to the coaches or to other players. So a high performance in culture would have, what I would say, the players or the coaches are willing to receive feedback, reflect on the feedback, and then respond accordingly. So open communication, give and receive, and that's when trust is really built in, when we have the environment where we can safely talk to each other and openly about opportunities, how we can performance improve. So you see teams that have strong feedback systems, well, then there's a fair chance they have a very good culture. We, not I think we all understand those ones. We like to hear more we as a team, or we, rather than I want to do this or I do that. So there is times I feel that we should be using I, because there is times when we are directly talking about ourselves or being asked questions about ourselves. But overall, a high performance culture, again, you'll see more examples of we being used and not I. And as coaches, I'd encourage to be mindful of how often you might use the word I. We often hear coaches, I need you to do this, or I want you to do that. Well, I think it's probably beyond just the coach. It might be as a team or a collective. We need to do this, or we want this to take place. Supportive environment's really important. Where we're working for the team and working with the team, we're helping our teammates to be better players. Now, I'm very strong on this in the high performance cultures, that it's our role as team members to help our fellow team members become better players, to support them to be better players. Yes, we want to develop our own game, but in a high functioning team, it's our role to ensure that we are supporting the other players to also become better players. Also showing empathy and understanding that not everybody may be able to do what we can do, or they may not always be in the same frame of mind or mind space as we might be at the time. Sportsmanship, I think, speaks for itself. It's not, I find often in netball or in other sports, I think, we know what good sports looks like, humble in victory, gracious in defeat. And I think it's also our role, sportsmanship, is to play to the rules. And when I say that, I often hear people say, oh, well, it's the umpire's job to control the game, or it's their role to control it. I actually don't believe that. I might, we could possibly have a debate about that in a moment, but I believe it's our job to play to the rules. And if it gets to the stage where the umpire has to control the game, well, then our sportsmanship's lost its way. And I would challenge that our culture's not where it should be. Plenty of other examples. If you'd like to write a few down, I'd be keen for you to write a few down and share a few at the end with us, so that I don't have to slip out the slide, please. Okay, high performance. So in summary, or all of that, high performance culture equals 100% accountable. So when we talk about having a high performance culture, that's who we are, what we do. So we're 100% accountable for our own actions, our behaviours, basically our actions and our behaviours. So if we do things well, yes, we'd expect recognition and reward. If we slip up, we make a mistake, we don't do it well, we put our hand up, acknowledge it, and then find ways how to deal with it. So we're always 100% a culture. So that's a high performance culture. A poor or a low performing culture will blame, will shame, will make excuses, find reasons why rather than reasons why not to succeed rather than reasons why. So when you're seeing a team that you believe has a high performance culture, I'll pretty much be confident they'll be 100% accountable for their choices and their actions and their responses. So whose culture is it? Well, it's always a bit of a question. And we often, we hear about it's a team-driven culture. So whose culture is it? Is it the coaches? The players, sorry. Is it the players' culture or is it the coaches? Whose culture is it? So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on that a little bit later on. A good starting point for that, in my opinion, is a good starting point as head coach, you are the culture. Your thoughts, your words, and your actions demonstrate and drive the culture. Culture is driven from top down, bottom up. A good example in recent times, it's probably not recent now, the last 25 years or so, was when the Sydney Swans were up in Sydney and were not a very successful team at all. Paul Roos came into the program as head coach, and he had a vision or a direction that he wanted to take the club. So he outlined that to the team. Then he got some centres of influence to support him. Stuart Maxfield, the captain at the time, ex-Richmond player, he jumped onto the Paul Roos vision, and then people followed Stuart Maxfield, and they followed until they eventually developed what they call the Bloods culture. And now Sydney are highly regarded for having one of the strongest professional sporting cultures in the country. So, but initially, and now they're actually known for being a culture that's driven by the players. So now they're driven bottom up. But initially, the coach had to come in and it went from top down to bottom up. So this then reinforces what we mentioned earlier tonight. Get the right set of active behaviours so you can coach and players can play. So it's absolutely vital that everyone's on board and you have a set of behaviours that everybody adheres to. So you can coach and players can play. So write this down. Again, I might ask you in a moment, how do you build your culture? So what does your team stand for? So thinking about the team that you currently coach or the team you aspire to coach, what do they stand for right now? Because if you don't, as you hear, we often hear, don't we? If you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing. So who are you and what are you as a team? From juniors through to seniors, like I say, it's all relative. You'd expect to have a more in-depth culture and set of behaviours for an open elite team as you might for a junior under 11 team, but everybody needs to stand for something, whether it's fun, participation, inclusion, support, learning, whatever it may be that's relative to your team. What would people say about your team? So if people were looking from the outside in, what would they say about your team? How would you be viewed? How do you want to be viewed? So like I say, this applies to all age groups. So what currently does your team stand for? And if you haven't really thought that through, that might be a conversation you and your players might like to have and your coaches or your team manager. So how do you build a culture? What behaviours do you want in your players and athletes? So that'll be the first question as a coach I would ask. What behaviours do you want? Because like I said, at this stage, the starting point will be, the coach will start driving the culture. So what behaviours do you want in your players and athletes? What behaviours do you currently have? So that are what would say high performance or productive behaviours? What behaviours do you currently have that are non-productive that you might consider to be or counterproductive that you continue to tolerate? So essentially, where are we now? So what do we aspire to? So what do we want? Where are we now? Is there a gap? Now, if there is a gap, well, then you need to work with your players and your fellow coaches or managers to identify what the gap is, what the gaps are, and what actions and behaviours you're going to take to close the gap, so that we remove the counterproductive behaviours and build a set of strong productive behaviours, what we call the not negotiables. So continuing on with how do you build your culture, some simple things to think about. Set the team direction, you get clear on your vision. So what do you stand for? What are you trying to achieve? So how do you want to be viewed? What do you want to be known for? Establish clear expectations. So once the expectations as a team that you've established, which is some of those behaviours we talked about earlier around punctuality, organisation. So establish the clear expectations. These aren't rules. Rules are, every time we have a rule, somebody just goes out and breaks a rule. These are how we expect to behave and how we expect to work together, how we're going to communicate. Then engage key players or staff members to help you. So who are the centres of influence that can help you really make this happen, so that it becomes player driven and not necessarily always coach driven. Provide orientation for any new players or staff that come into your team. So what is expected when they join your team? Not just how we play the game, but what is expected as far as behaviours on and off the court goes. Really important that you orientate early, because it's very hard to change direction later down the track if people have gone a little bit offline. Really important is to manage any destructive behaviours. So if we talk about destructive behaviours, that might be the unnecessary comments, the undermining, the lack of discipline, the taking the shortcuts. So we can't afford to walk past. If we walk past a behaviour, that will become the behaviour, as I mentioned earlier, that'll become your new culture. So I would suggest that once you've got your clear expectations, challenge the behaviour but support the person. So we're not out to vilify or attack the person or the player. We're there to support them. So our role as coaches is also, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but we make sure that when we're building a culture, we challenge behaviour, but we find ways to support the person. Create effective ways to communicate each person's performance and behaviours. Keep everybody engaged. So it's really important that we have open communication. So we, again, rewarding good performance, working and supporting the person if we have to have some behavioural change. Keep everybody engaged in the direction we want to head. If you're not certain how to do some of these actions, like setting team direction or manage destructive behaviours, seek help. There's plenty of experienced coaches out there, or you're certainly welcome to get in contact with me to seek some help and some support, because it's not always an easy thing to do, but it's a really important thing that must be done. A little bit of example of a brand of behaviours. So just following up from that last year's Tasmania 19 under team for 2020, unfortunately didn't get to play due to COVID, but we did some work together on setting their brand, how they want to be viewed, which was invested, united and fierce. So that was what they stood for. That was how they wanted to be viewed. Their aim was to improve their ranking on the table, become more competitive. Get a little bit more respect for the Tassie netball program. So they were going to be an investor, united and fierce. And so those words are the words that held the group together. They're above the line behaviours, and we talk about above the line there, the behaviours, again, what we call the productive behaviours. So that keep you above the line. Their behaviours are going to be that they're always team first, always looking to be proactive, and always respectful of teammates, the team, umpires, staff, supporters, whoever it might be. Really important. So we'll be doing some working, and we have a camp coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and the 17 state team and the 19 state team will be putting something similar together again to take into this year's Nationals in July. So just finally, this is our last slide, and in summary, and at the start when I talked about agreed purpose, dynamics and mechanics, I said leadership was pivotal to driving culture. And as we said, adopting the stance where it starts with the coach first. So what's the coach's role? Reinforce your culture consistently. Make sure that it's regularly front of mind. It doesn't get tucked away in the drawer or pinned against the wall. Put in the bottom of the school bag. So coaches, we have to lead by example. Deliver on your promises and set the standard. So we have to make sure that whatever we expect from our players, that we are squeaky clean and doing it as well or better. So lead by example, deliver on your promises. Don't overpromise, but this is the way to build trust, is do what you say you're going to do, when you say you're going to do it, how you say you're going to do it, and the way you said you're going to do it. So deliver on your promises and set the standard. Be an avid learner. So we talked about earlier around a culture of continuous improvement, be an avid learner. So source opportunities to continuously improve as a coach. We ask our players to do so. So as coaches, we need to stay ahead of the curve all the time as well. Build relationships. If I said one thing, and I haven't mentioned it earlier tonight, I think there's one thing that's pivotal to a really high performance culture is strong trust-based relationships. We don't necessarily have to be best friends, but we have to have a trusting relationship. So, and that comes from communicating, really working out what makes your players tick. So people say, oh, you don't want to get too close to your players. No, you don't necessarily, but you need to have a strong, open relationship where you can clearly communicate how you feel, how each of you feel, and really understanding what each other's motivations are. We often think we assume what we know what the players want. Have we ever really asked them, do we really know what their aspirations are? The more we know and understand, the better we are going to be able to coach them on a daily basis. Leadership appointments, again, a really pivotal thing. Historically, leaders get chosen on popularity or best players. Really important, a coach's role to ensure the leadership appointments take into account behavioural aspects as well. It's not necessarily always the best player makes the best leader. It's not always the most popular player makes the best leader. So be really mindful that the leadership part of the appointment process for leaders involves how well do they live the brand and behaviours and expectations that the team has already set out. Game and training reviews. I would imagine that we all do game reviews afterwards. We debrief and we review our trainings as well. Historically, from a lot of coaches I've worked with, the majority of the review is based around how well they threw the ball, how well they caught the ball, how well did they shoot. Really important, in my opinion, to include in your review system, rate against your, not just against your performance, but also rate against your behaviours. How well did we operate as a team? How well did we communicate? Did we stick to our game plan? Were we supportive of each other? So make sure that we're regularly keeping our culture consistently in front of us. So what our expectations are we living them and breathing them all every day? Team selection, ensure behaviours also have a weight in team selection. So again, we often get caught picking the best players, which is important, but are the best players also living the team culture? Are they doing the expectations and living to the brand? So ensure that the behaviours have weight when we're having team selection. Sometimes I hear cut and dried, oh, we can't pick her because they didn't train. There might be a genuine reason why they didn't train. So that's where we had the communication. So it's not that cut and dried. It's about how do we live the daily behaviours. And finally, reinforcing, so we should consistently be hearing it in our language. We should be reading it when we see writing or goal setting or any articles in the paper. We should hear it. We should be reading it. We should see it in front of our eyes. And as coaches, we certainly should be living it. So I always think a really good way to pick a high performance culture is you don't have to be told about it. You don't have to hear teams say, oh, well, we really get on well, we do it for the coach. You should be able to just see it, you'll just hear it, you'll just see it being lived rather than having to be everyone telling us about it. And finally, last little thing for the coaches, important, role model the behaviours, reward the behaviours when we see good performance or living to the culture. Make sure we acknowledge it and recognise it. Don't take it for granted. If we see that it's not quite right or it's below the standard we would expect that we've set out for the team, make sure that we challenge it. Okay, and find, so we have to manage those behaviours as well. Okay. Thank you. And question time, I'll get back on the screen. Where are we?